Girls allowed, and just like everything in the games industry, it starts with a terrible pun, so I do apologise for that straight away. But I'm talking about why bullying in games is kind of trying to censor women's voices, but it's trying but not really succeeding. I worked in the games industry for 12 years. Oh, look, I'm already doing myself down. I call myself a games industry veteran because game development is like a war in many ways, and I bear many scars, most of them about being made redundant. You can tell by the fact that I worked at least 4 companies in 12 years, so that tells you how often I got made redundant, which is kind of a lot, and might actually explain one of the reasons why I'm now working at the University of Bradford. I'm the games lecturer there, and I have 2 undergraduate courses for games that I teach and run. I'm also a budding academic. In fact, I shouldn't really be here today. I should be at home finishing off my PhD proposal. So forgive me if I run off to do that, because it is due very, very soon. I'm also a long-term feminist campaigner, which is why I've got here an angry bird, because I think that's how I describe myself. So there will be some anger and some passion in this, and excuse me if I get kind of excited about things. Here are some games that I made in a team. You can see that I've made quite a lot of games, and some of them are sports titles, some of them are science fiction. I even made some games specifically for girls. So I think it would be fair to say that I've kind of experienced game development for pretty much everybody. Now, the games industry has actually got quite a bad reputation, and I'm pretty sure that when you think of gamers, and especially game developers, that this is the kind of image that you have in mind. I have to say that that is quite an outdated notion. We don't all look like this. For a start, we've all quit smoking. But this is kind of a bit more what the games industry really looks like. I've stolen these pictures from some of my games industry friends off Facebook, and I'd like to apologise to them, but I think I'd better apologise to Mark Zuckerberg, because I think he might own these photos. But as you can see, these women here, they all have healthy relationships. They've got family, they've got friends, they actually go outdoors, you know, they have a life. And the fact is that most of the men in the games industry do that as well, and people don't kind of understand that. So if we think that maybe we're giving the games industry a bad rap by thinking about what the games industry is, then people might feel the same way about gamers. This is the University of Bradford Video Game Society. It's not all of them, there are many, many more. And you can see here that there's a great mix of people from all kinds of backgrounds. There really aren't that many archetypes here, unless of course you count the zombie fixation, which for some reason seems to be kind of irrespective of geography or demographic. Everybody seems to like zombies when they're in the games industry. So if that's what the games industry and gamers are really like, what's the problem? And the problem is that there are some people who want those bad old days back. We're talking bad old days of probably the early 90s at this point. You know, the bad old days where all gamers were males, they were white, they were heterosexual, they were under 30, that they'd kind of earned their right to be in the games industry by giving up all hope of any kind of happiness outside of games. And these people who want this kind of thing back, they can be gamers, they can be developers, or they can come from games marketing. And this is some of the kind of censorship that these people try and attempt. You may or may not have heard of Anita Sarkeesian. She's a feminist blogger, works for Feminist Frequency, and she recently sought Kickstarter funding, so crowdsourced funding for her Tropes versus Women project, where she was going to make a series of short educational videos about how women are depicted in video games. But the backlash that she suffered just from going for this crowdsourcing was absolutely out of this world. You know, I apologise in advance if anything on here really offends you, and if you are easily offended, do not read this slide. This is an example of the abuse that she suffered online. This is actually her Wikipedia page, which was increasingly frequently defaced with kind of all kinds of scary abuse. I mean, she got abuse online, offline. Apparently some of it was quite close to home. It did include death threats. And you can see that this kind of abuse was intended to instill fear and shame, and to really get women to censor themselves when they go and speak out in public discourse about what's happening in games. To add insult to injury, or possibly injury to insult, this is a game, a viral game that went online called Beat Up Anita Sarkeesian, where you could actually beat her up for presumably having the gall to have any kind of voice. But the good news is that this kind of censorship isn't working, because the original goal that Anita Sarkeesian had was for $6,000. There, right at the bottom, she actually ended up with $158,922. So she had nearly 7,000 backers, which averaged more than $20 per backer. Some of those dollars are mine. Not a lot of them, I hasten to add. It's not like I gave her $100,000. I totally didn't. But just to kind of put this money in perspective, the average iPhone app has a development budget of $35,000. And she's now got 160 to do her tropes versus women. Within minutes, pretty much, of this getting funded, the page was inundated with all kinds of supportive messages from women all around the world, and there's some of them on here, 18 plus pages of comments telling her, yes, go you, we want you to do this. So when it comes to censoring women, this really hasn't worked, in fact, quite the opposite. There was also a really nice backlash in the sort of wider discourse that happened. This was around about July, August time, about women getting censored, getting torn down, getting flamed whenever they spoke out on the internet, and there was a lot of internet abuse happening. And that prompted the Thank You Hater video. Has anyone here seen this one? If you haven't, that's why I've put the truncated URL up there. Write this down. You have to see this video. It's hysterical and it's very powerful. It's very funny. There are some triggers in there, but it's very true. But the point is that this video got mainstream coverage in the press. We've got people like The Guardian and The Telegraph leaping into this debate, bringing it out in the open. So really good responses there. And also inside games, we had some prominent female gamers, excuse me, who are in the public eye, who actually spoke publicly and in their own spaces about their right to stand up and be counted as gamers and as women. And it was really quite inspirational that all these women just suddenly came out and this kind of big backlash to these trolls really exploded online. So in terms of gamers, they're not really censoring women just yet. I think some of them are trying, but they're not succeeding. But what about marketing? I mean, marketing, it's corporate. So you'd think that it would be a bit more egalitarian. No, you'd be wrong. 2 words for you, booth babes. If you don't know what a booth babe is, they are a babe who is hired to be on a booth. At least they've got the simple title. But the idea is that in large expos, particularly in technology expos, in huge places like Earl's Court, where Eurogamer in London happens, that these women are hired. They have no interest in games, they have no understanding of games, but they are hired to be eye candy, to draw the punter and the press to a particular booth so that they can get coverage. Now, booth babes have been a problem in games for a while, but the real problem happened this year when at Eurogamer they had QR codes on their bottoms next to Play for Cash. And I think everybody here would agree that that's not particularly good. It doesn't send out a very good message. And in fact, it was so shocking and created such a backlash that we ended up having an apology from Rupert, I'm not entirely sure what his name is, from the managing director of Eurogamer. He actually went in there and said, we're not going to have booth babes anymore. And the problem with booth babes is that if you are in a particular space where most women in that space are being physically and sexually objectified, it becomes extremely hard to be a woman working in that space for any other reason. So for female developers, professional female gamers, you know, there are women who game professionally. For women in the press, all of these people, women in marketing, I myself was on a booth for the University of Bradford. We were having to stand next to these women while men went and photographed their arses. Excuse the French. But you know, it's kind of a bit of a problem. But kudos to Rupert for going and going, actually, do you know what? We're going to end it here right now. There's not going to be any booth babes next year. And that was a really strong response, which I thought was really positive. More recently, when it comes to marketing, and I do know that there's at least one person in this room who's under 18, so for the next slide, you're going to have to shut your eyes. The recent Hitman 3 trailer, Hitman 3 came out this week. It showed nuns with guns. Now, if you think that we're now so post-feminist that we can stand here and go, yeah, do you know what, sexy ladies, guns, a habit, yeah, you know, that's quite ironic, we can deal with this. Well, this wasn't really the problem. The next slide, close your eyes now, is this problem. And in this video, right at the end, there was this awful scene where all these women were brutally beaten to death and shot. This is in nice slow motion, by the way, high definition slow motion. And I think the problem here is that it's not okay to sexualize women while hating them. You can't have that sex and hate in the same thing. And it's certainly not okay to fetishize brutally murdering women, particularly women of the cloth who also seem to be prostitutes at the same time. I think you find that everybody comes out of that one pretty badly. So why this isn't censorship? Well, this is where it gets a little bit weak. We actually had a weak source apology from the company that made Hitman, and they were actually quoted as saying that they didn't specifically intend to court controversy, which is kind of making it worse. You know, if they wanted to court controversy, you could go, fine, you know, it was a stupid PR stunt, we forgive you. But by saying, oh, we didn't realise it was going to be completely offensive to absolutely all female kind, kind of implies that there might be some endemic issues that they and their marketing team might need to talk about. For example, how many women do they have on the board? How many female developers do they have? Did they run it past anybody with any religious views? You know, all these kinds of things does hint to sort of bigger questions. And finally, I'm going to get on to the developers. And sometimes they're really not helping. Game developers don't help themselves. This is a still from the new Lara Croft game that recently came out. It is a dark origin story, which didn't actually contain rape, but it certainly alluded to it, and it implied rape as a motivational tool for women. Because frankly, women don't want to survive unless they have rape to motivate them, or at least that's what it seemed to imply. The reason why this is a real problem and why it's trying to censor women is because 3 of the biggest players in the industry were involved in this debacle. You have Crystal Dynamics, who are the game developers. They're very well respected. They have a lot of employees. You have the actual senior executive here, Ron Rosenberg, was the one who was actually talking about this rape here. So you have an executive from this company talking about it. The interview happened at E3, which happens in America. It is the world's biggest games expo. So on the biggest platform for games, you have one of the biggest chaps in one of the biggest companies talking about rape being a wonderful motivational tool and how it's great to, you know, dehumanize the most famous female game character of all time, which was then reported on Kotaku, which is one of the biggest pop culture blogs online today. So what you have is big players making big blunders very, very publicly. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that we kind of have this censorship cycle, or at least attempted censorship cycle. Oh, I can't even take it now. I nearly swore. It's a cycle. It doesn't begin with a sh. Anyway, developers create sexist content. It is true. It might not be intentional, but it's true. Which then, of course, leads marketing to use some kind of sexist PR stunts. Pundits then go and condemn sexism so that they can have a nice controversy on their hands, a bit of sensationalism. Gamers then go, whoa, whoa, hang on a minute, this is censorship, so they get up in arms and they get in on the debate, which, you know, you could argue causes women to self-censor so that they're not putting themselves in the firing line for all this kind of furore what's happening online. And if that is true, then the result is an industry that's unhappy with itself. This is a word cloud from the start of my research. I'm actually looking into, or should I say, researching quite carefully, the experiences of people online and how that relates to prejudice and bigotry. And I did a pilot study of all of my game students and as many people in Eurogamer down in London that I could speak to. And I asked them, if you've ever muted a player on voice chat, that's in-game, what is the main reason why? Now, it's annoying. People say that it doesn't matter what your political beliefs are, whether you believe it's right or wrong, it's just annoying. So even just from a quality standpoint, it's kind of a bit of a problem. Unfortunately, we seem to have lost one of my major points here, which is how do we remedy this situation? And we remedy this by questioning everything. And what we question are those things that have now magically disappeared. But what we question is that at the top there, developers create sexist content. Why does it have to be sexist? We need to question that. When marketing uses sexist PR stunts, does sex actually sell? Do we have any figures that tell us that because we see breasts, it's going to sell X more copies? When it comes to the pundits at the bottom who condemn sexism, do we need this kind of sensation? Is it really necessary? Is it helpful? When it comes to the gamers having this backlash and crying censorship, are they just trolls or is it everybody? You know, is that more of a problem? And finally, when it comes to women self-censoring, well, the fact that I'm here today tells you that we're not. We don't self-censor, so we're already questioning that already, which means there are good things happening. And that's already happening right now. If you are a Twitter person, you might have seen the One Reason Why hashtag that exploded last Tuesday, where women suddenly were kind of talking about one reason why they didn't want to work in games anymore, or one reason why they thought games were sexist. And a lot of horror stories came out of One Reason Why. There was also a sister hashtag called One Reason to Be, which I participated in, which is about one reason to be in the games industry as a woman, and so that you can actually make positive changes. So my point is, you know, there's kind of been some bad stuff happening in games, some of it's fairly shocking, but we're moving in the right direction, we're dragging this into the open, we're looking at it under the microscope, and we're making some changes. Being an academic, I have references. Don't read them, but if you want them, I can give you this slide. And yeah, that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.